All right, so you have a general understanding of supply and demand and how they work and how they're graphed. And so I'm so excited because now we can start really working with graphs. We can start really working with how to shift demand. And we can do that by using the graph again. So I want to start off by clarifying something that generally confuses students. There's a difference between quantity demanded and demand. So let's just use this graph to sort of explain that. If you were at the top price of $5 and we're making 10 at $5, well, we know that if we decrease the price, people will start buying more, right? If we lower the price to 4, we know people will buy 20. But that's moving up and down the demand curve, moving up and down, increasing and decreasing the price. But what if we actually wanted to increase the demand, meaning we want to shift that line to the right so that at $5, we're not selling 10, we're selling 30, right? There's actually more demanded. And there are things that can shift demand. So keep in mind that the amount demanded, the quantity demanded, is not the same thing as demand. So today we're going to look at demand. How do we move this line to the right to increase demand? And what are some things that might shift that line to the left, might decrease demand? And this will start to make sense as you start to see it in real life, which is what's so great about economics. So we're going to look at what are called demand shifters, things that actually shift demand. Here's your list of the things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at taste preferences, the number of consumers, substitution and complements. We're going to look at income, and income includes inferior goods, and then expectations. So let's just take taste preferences for this to start with. So we want to look at how do we increase demand? So we want the price is going to stay the same, but the amount of the product the demanded for the product is going to increase. Well, take, for example, a study comes out and says that if you eat more meat, you're going to live longer. Well, what happens? People go out and they eat more meat. The price is not going to change for that meat, right? People just buy more of it. So that's going to so instead of people only eating meat once a week or twice a week, they may eat meat 7 times a week. So the demand actually changes just because someone's preference or tastes change, right? So price of meat will stay the same, but the amount of meat demanded will increase, and that's a shift to the right. But the opposite can be also true, right? A study comes out that says gluten, everybody's on this gluten-free diet right now, which is basically don't eating bread, don't eat corn, that sort of thing. I did it for a week. It didn't last very long. So what happens to the demand for bread and rice? You're going to see that shift to the left. The price didn't change, but the demand changed, right? The quantity the demand is going to shift to the left. So what you want to take away from this, very simply, is that price is not changing, but the demand is changing. And make sure that you understand that you can move up and down in price and change the quantity demanded, or you can move left to right and actually shift the demand. And that's what economists want to do. They want to know, well, what can I do to actually increase demand, not just change the price of something? And you can do that by trying to influence people's taste preferences. Something else that can shift demand, the number of consumers. How many people are actually purchasing the product, right? If you are in a small town and there's only 10 people buying your product, and then more people come into the town and the town grows, now you've got 20 people purchasing your product, and you don't have to change the price, it's just more demand. Of course, I'm your history teacher, so I definitely like to relate it to history. So when men went off to war in World War II, they came back and there was a huge amount of babies being born. It's called the baby boom. And with this increase, this was like a substantial increase in population. My mom was a product of the baby boom. So there was an increase in the demand for diapers when these kids were children, and then as they moved into the car buying period, suddenly we had to figure out how to get these kids around, so that's when the minivan came into creation. And as this group of people, that is a huge group of people that are called the baby boomers, as they age, the products for them go up in demand. Like the demand for facelifts gets more as they get older. Retirement communities, the demand for retirement communities goes up. So the number of consumers definitely has a huge effect on the economy, and it has a huge effect on the demand. Same thing for a decrease in the population. Let's say that there's an army base and there's 100,000 people on this army base. That army base closes, suddenly there's a shift in demand to the left because there's nobody there to buy the products. So now we're going to look at something that's really neat. It's called price of related goods. And there's two types. There's something called substitutes and something called complements. So we're going to look at substitutes first. Substitute says as the demand for one good goes up, down. Let's just use what I've got written on the board. The demand for one good goes down. The demand for its substitute goes up. So, for example, if you have cow's milk and the price of cow's milk goes up, people are not going to buy as much cow's milk, but they're not going to stop buying milk. So they might buy something else. They might buy a substitute, something like almond milk, right? So think of something like I am a diabetic and I use a ton of sweeteners, right? And the price of Sweet and Low was going up and up, and so I stopped buying Sweet and Low, and I started buying something called Stevia, which was cheaper. So if the price of one good goes up, up or down is going to be the inverse for its substitute, right? Because you can just buy something else instead. And that can shift that line to the left or to the right. Complements are the opposite. So the demand of one good is going up. It's going to cause the demand for the other to go up. They're complementary to each other. For example, people love to talk about hamburgers and hamburger buns, right? So if hamburgers suddenly became very expensive and people stopped buying hamburgers, they're also going to stop buying the hamburger buns, right? So the demand for hamburgers went down and the demand for the hamburger buns went down. You have to get them, they go together. Hot dogs and hot dog buns, that sort of thing. So you need to know that the two types of goods, you need to know substitutes, how they work inversely as far as demand, and then complements, which work directly with each other to shift that demand left and right. So let's talk about money, right? So if you get more money, you can buy more stuff, right? So, I mean, that makes absolute sense. If I have more money, I can definitely purchase more things. However, we want to talk about something called inferior goods. Not all goods are equal. So when I was in college, I didn't have a lot of money, right? So you would naturally think that now that I'm a teacher and I'm a grown-up and I'm married and I can use my husband's money, I demand more goods. I'm just going to flat out say I purchase more, right, now that I have more money. But I don't purchase the same goods. When I was in college, I didn't have a lot of money, so I bought a lot of ramen noodles and Subway, and I just bought the things that I could afford. I bought a lot of them, a lot of ramen noodles, so the demand for ramen noodles was really high, right, when I was in college. But as my income increased, I started buying different goods, right? I start going to nicer restaurants. I start purchasing healthier foods. So make sure that if you see a question about income, that you're making sure that it's what type of good is it? Is it an inferior good? For example, housing. People who don't have a lot of money, they generally rent apartments. Well, if you increase your income, that doesn't necessarily mean that the demand for apartments would go up. That actually might mean that the demand for apartments goes down because they shift and change to houses, and so the demand for houses would go up. So you have to think about, is it an inferior good? The last thing that we want to look at is expectations. So if expecting the price of something to go up. For example, let's just use something like gas, and you know that next month gas is going to go up. You might run to the gas station and fill up your tank. So that can shift the demand. The knowing that something might increase or knowing that something might decrease causes people to change their spending habits, right? So, for example, like in the 70s, there were long lines for gas because we knew that gas was going to go up. So those are your demand shifters. So you need to make sure that you understand that you can change the demand by looking at taste and preferences, number of consumers, the price of related goods, and there's two types, substitutes and complements, income, make sure you understand what an inferior good is, and then your expectations.